Hi, my name's Matt.
My name's Chris. My name's Dominic.
And we're in a band called Muse.
Mid-80s, Matthew Bellamy from Cambridge, Dominic Howard from Stockport and Chris Wolstenholme from York all moved to a small seaside town called Teignmouth in Devon. They first met each other at Teignmouth Community College and soon after became close friends. After many years playing in various bands, Matt, Dom and Chris finally came together in 1993 to form the group Rocket Baby Dolls. The sleepy seaside town of Teignmouth would seem an unlikely place for the trio to spring from. However, the lack of nightlife, music scene or excitement made them even more determined to succeed.
But when you're sort of between the age of 13 and 18, there's just nothing to do there. There's no nightlife at all. So yeah, we just started this band to sort of kill the boredom, really. Especially being in a band, well, because there's no sort of music scene going on down there. So I mean, you get all these cities, London, Manchester, and Wales, Cardiff and stuff. You've got all big bands coming out, big scenes going on, but there's nothing going on down there, so which was good for us because it kept us completely secluded from any other scene and gave us a chance to develop our own thing.
Teignmouth, it's been famously described as God's waiting room because it's a bit of a pensioner's paradise.
Devon. What's Devon known for? Cream cheese, isn't it? Clotted cream, the old Frisian cow.
Certainly for teenagers, I don't think it would be a place to hang out and party with your mates.
Nothing comes from the southwest except cider, you know, nothing famous comes out of it.
The sort of place you go to retire or die.
So to have like what is an international huge band that have many years still ahead of them, and they're not just commercially successful, they're very sort of credibly successful as well. I think that, you know, that's something that people are probably pretty proud of.
I'd say they're all very genuine people, like, you know, very shrewd, very aware of what's going on around them. The way they were brought up, the way they met, you know, and possibly their surroundings being such a small place, like, you know, caused them to have a drive to, you know, I suppose, get together and do something.
More oxygen, more oxygen.
This explosive band, formed by teenage friends, first took off when they entered a local Battle of the Bands competition at Teignmouth's Broadmeadow Sports Centre. Winning the competition put them on the road to fame, and they haven't looked back since.
I worked for Broadmeadow Sports Centre and we were looking to put something on for young people in Teignmouth and the surrounding areas. Had to pick a time of year that was quiet so that the centre could be taken over totally by the bands, which was February, and that's how it got put together. We decided we'd give kids a chance, give them a prize of a recording studio session and hopefully set them on the way to whatever they hope to do.
Battle of the Bands, I think they paid their tenner to enter. They slapped face paint all over themselves. Basically just took the piss out of all the other bands that were there.
There was quite a few in Teignmouth and the surrounding areas, Dawlish and Ashburton, there were quite a few bands there. So there was plenty of people entering it. I think there were 10 in the first one. There was just one round. They came on stage and they did a song and they were judged by a group of judges and given a score, and at the end of all the bands playing, they were all told where they'd finished and what they'd won and all the rest of it, and then a band would play in the evening that was already a sort of a band on the circuit, so gave them a taste of things to come.
I think Matt got loads of his college mates to leap up on stage, so there was a great ruckus at the end of the gig. Well, they wanted to win, and they did win.
The Rocket Baby Dolls' stage invasion and their aggressive performance made other bands question their winning of the competition.
There was a little bit of controversy actually. There were certain bands that didn't think they should have won. and we had a couple of complaints come back to the Sports Centre saying that they shouldn't have won, and I had to say, look, it's nothing to do with the Sports Centre. They've been judged by a panel of judges to be the best band, but I think it was just sour grapes from other band members.
Knowing what we know now, what would you have given to have been at that gig? Quite a lot, I'll wager.
They went on to, obviously, to Coombs Head and had a recording contract, or recording session up there with Coombs Head, and then I think they went on and got another recording session with Coombs Head after that, and then obviously they got in touch with this Phil Courtauld, who I believe sort of managed them for a while and got them gigs like at the Cavern in Exeter and various places.
After winning the Battle of the Bands, they changed their name to Muse and made the move to Exeter. In June 1994, Matt and Dom enrolled in Exeter College and studied 3 A-levels, while Chris, being younger, still had another year of school to go. Matt moved into a flat above one of 2 pawn shops in Exeter whilst cleaning out toilets at a local campsite. Chris worked in a guitar shop in Torquay, and Dom helped dress students for graduation ceremonies. Manson Guitar Shop is where Matt first bought his guitars, and still has them handmade now by owner Hugh Manson himself. Meanwhile, the band started to make demos. These soon proved to be successful, and in October 1994, Muse gained a regular slot at the most successful club in Exeter, the Cavern.
Well, when I was working in Exeter, I was aware of them right from sort of the early days, so when they used to perform in the Cavern, and obviously because they were an up-and-coming local band, we used to feature them in the paper I was working for there. I was working for the Express and Echo newspaper in Exeter, and we used to feature them in that paper and charted their sort of ride. I mean, they're also kind of alongside Coldplay, which were getting a lot of attention as well because they're from the same area. Well, Chris Martin is, but Muse were always sort of in the background.
In 1995, after playing regular slots at the Cavern, Muse managed to get their first London gigs, bagging a slot at the infamous Bull and Gate pub. The venue was very well known for up-and-coming bands making that break into the London scene.
The early gigs, I think it was the Bull and Gate where I first saw them. And in those days you wouldn't recognise them if you were standing 2 feet from them. They looked a lot different, and actually they sounded a great deal different. They've changed a great deal. I personally thought the gig was a bit rubbish. I thought it was a bit ropey. But even then, I could tell they had that hunger. They really wanted this.
Shortly after, Dennis Smith, owner of Sawmill Studios, first spotted the band at the Barclay Centre in Camborne. Muse impressed him so much that he offered them encouragement, experience, and more importantly, free studio time. A few years later, after the release of a number of EPs, Muse's dream came true. On December the 23rd, 1998, they received a record contract with Maverick, owned by pop star Madonna and funded by one of the largest global music companies, Warner Music. But the deal was only for the US. 5 years on from their first gig, things were really happening for Muse. The next step of the journey was the release of the Muscle Museum EP in January 1999. It went straight in at number 3 in the NME Indie Singles chart. The EP included the songs Sober and Uno.
I first heard of Muse back in 1999. I was writing a music fanzine called Cold Platform, and I got sent their first single, Uno, and I put it on and I listened to it. I thought, this is a bit different. And so I just started looking into them from there.
And it was clear that these guys were sounding a lot different in the studio to their live performance. What was coming through was some attention to detail and the real talent. They were very ambitious in the studio, and that was reflected in the sound.
I mean, they had done gigs before, and they'd released an EP, Muscle Museum, before I heard of them, but from getting that single, I've pretty much followed them through to where they are today.
Uno was to become their first single released through Maverick. At the beginning of 1999, Muse recorded their very first album, SHOWBIZ. Having already developed a number of songs for the record, the band were packed off for 3 weeks to London's RAK studios, where they recorded with producer John Leckie. SHOWBIZ was released in October 1999 and sold 700,000 copies worldwide. The first song from the new album was called Sunburn, which represented how the world was becoming more and more isolated.
A lack of religion and spirituality in kids growing up in this day and age, I mean, and everyone's using computers and technology and stuff to get in touch with each other, and I think there's a big feeling of being cut off at the moment when you're at home on your own. Do you know what I mean? I think that's why I come from.
In 1999, just before SHOWBIZ was released, Muse went on their first world tour, which included Glastonbury and the Woodstock Festival.
I think the main problem with Woodstock was just the fact that everything was so spread out and you had to walk like 2 miles to get from one stage to the other. We just can't bother to do it.
Glastonbury was really cool. It was a real shock really to see because the whole tent was packed. We didn't expect that and everyone went nuts.
About 2 minutes before we played, it was absolutely empty. There's no one there and we were going, oh my god, there's about 8 people sitting down, lying down, sunbathing. And then about 1 minute before we played, it just about 5,000 people just like filled it up like that, and then it all spread out further than that, which was really nice. It was a real big surprise to know that to see that all the gigs we've been doing around the country had been sort of people have been listening and noticing. You know.
Scott McKenzie toured with Muse for 9 months as part of the back line team, working as a guitar technician. He recollects his time with Muse on tour.
I have a friend of mine who was a tour manager, and he was looking at this band that he'd heard about called Muse, and he played me a little bit in his car. Like one day we'd met up and he was just basically playing me through a couple of tracks of this new band that he was going to work with, and you know it sounded quite interesting. So I said to him and said, like, you know, if there's any sort of backline work available that I would be interested, and he said okay, fine. And then I ended up meeting him again a few months later, and he was still talking about the same band. He was still, you know, he'd met up with them a couple of times, and you know, it was all looking like it was going to sort of fall into place. And so again, I sort of like reiterated that I was interested in working with the band. I quite liked what I was hearing, you know. Then from there, it sort of kind of went step to step, and he got me in on a gig, which was basically purely to fill in because someone couldn't make it. Due to illness, as far as I know, they were unable to make the show, and so I just filled in for them, and that was the first time I literally came across Muse, and you know, it, in a word, it blew my mind. Well, the first time I met them about 3 days before the show, and it was in a rehearsal room in London. At the time, basically, you had a band that was still a very early stage in their career, even though they'd been touring as immensely as they had. You know, there was still a lot of things being done in a very long-winded way round. You know what I mean? They could be simplified. They seemed very, I suppose, quite shy, like because you know it was still quite a new thing to them. They were aware that they were on a trip of a lifetime, but you know, you've got all these people that are suddenly coming at you, going, right, do this way and do this way, and like, you know, etc. Right, and they're a bit like, sort of like, you know, they don't know what to take as being right or wrong. It's always pretty difficult when a band first starts touring. By that I mean proper touring, not jumping in a rusty transit van and going to Slough Poly. It's very important to get the right people around you when you do that. What was good about the guys is that very early on they got the right team around them, and it was very important to them, and it paid off, it paid dividends. I think also there was a bit of possible disbelief. I mean, I remember when I first met Chris that he didn't have a pedal board at all, yet for a man that had so many pedals that were being set up every day, he didn't have anything to put them on. And so I said to him, right, by the show that I do for you, there will be a pedal board. And he was like, yeah, okay. You know what I mean? And it was like a kind of a shrug of disbelief. Like, you know, so I made sure there was going to be a pedalboard there for that show. It was just a case of someone spending a couple of hours sitting down with a soldering iron and just making it up. I looked after Chris, his bass, bass rigs, just generally making sure everything ran smoothly for them on stage. From the production point of view, because it was such a hectic tour, I sort of assisted the production side of things in the fact that basically like just arranging that the equipment was there when we flew into other countries. You know, we were handballing quite a lot of stuff through airports, which is where you're taking specific things that, you know, they can't supply in those countries. And like, I think on some shows we were carrying up to 40 items through an airport, like, you know, which, you know, we would get to the show and then we would combine that with the backline that we've hired out there, which would be drum kits and whatever. So, you know, you're seeing stuff that, you know, like you've never seen before, and you've got to turn it into a rig that, you know, the band would recognise and work with, right, which at times could be entertaining. When I was touring with Muse, we went to Norway, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Australia, Japan, England, and pretty much did it all again as well. I think I've seen them probably 60 or 70 times, you know, in 9 months. It was a roller coaster, right? And like, so much happened in such a short space of time. Like, although 9 months seems a long time, it's not when you're, you know, doing that kind of thing, you know, especially when you're changing the country every day, or, you know, like, kind of, I mean, I think in that period we did somewhere in the region of about 46 festivals, like, in a space of like 7 months. Chris was always very much a family man, you know, totally devoted to his girlfriend at the time he's now married to, which in this kind of job is a very honourable thing to do, you know. It's like, you know, because it can be very hard, because you do spend a lot of way of time from home, like, you know, and, you know, it's really nice when you come across people who are like that. Yeah, when I first met Dom, I suppose, yeah, cheeky chappy, right, you know, good fun, like, mischievous streak. Matt, much more withdrawn, but then, you know, Matt's one of those people, you know, I think he's even admitted in interviews himself that he lets go once he's got a guitar around his neck. You know, the guitar is almost like a kind of, you know, I suppose a shield or something. It's something that he can hide behind in a way. I mean, the guy is an absolutely phenomenal musician.
I think what's often forgotten is quite what a good guitar player this guy is, and as a pianist he's pretty amazing too. Interestingly, the music press don't really seem to focus on this, or they haven't picked up on this. To Matt, it's all about getting the sound right.
I mean, Matt said the words aren't his sort of first mode of expression, music is, and with a band like Muse you can really see that, because the music says everything. You know, I mean, it sounds a bit grandiose to say that, but the music really does say everything. What
he won't do is the great look at me, ego 10-minute guitar god solo. He just wants it to sound right.
Because there's a lot of bands, certainly like, you know, like a lot of British bands, it's a lot of attitude, it's a lot of sort of like knowing the right people, or you know, the look. And that's actually not got much to do with the music. It can do wonders for sales, but I find like with a Muse record, you don't need to, you know anymore. So it's like, I think it's to their credit that, you know, their music says it all.
Shortly after the world tour, John Leckie and Dave Bottrill returned to start work on a second album, which was to be called Origins of Symmetry.
Towards the end of the bit that I did, they were writing songs that became Origins of Symmetry. Some of the songs that were already around in the set became Origins of Symmetry. It got quite confusing though, because for ages when they used to name songs, they used to name them things like New One and New One and New One. Like, you know, and if those songs had different tunings, it got quite confusing, because, you know, you had to think, right, okay, which one are we on now? Is it New One or is it New One? We took the gear into the studios to do some of the early demos for what became Origins of Symmetry. which were, you know, quite phenomenal as well. I remember hearing early demos, and they were, you know, you could see where, you know, you could see the sound was developing.
March 2001 saw the release of their first single from the new album called Plug-in Baby. The track marked a departure from the old Muse sound and made it to 11 in the UK charts. Shortly after, a second single, Newborn, was released. This time, it reached number 12.
I heard a story about a song called Plug-in Baby, and Chris on bass liked a particular sound, and he had filters, effects pedals set up in a specific way, but importantly, he could only get the sound he wanted if he had brand new bass strings on the guitar, which meant that for every performance of this song on tour, he had to have brand new bass strings on that guitar. And it's madness!
After the success of their initial singles, June 2001 saw the release of the second album, Origins of Symmetry. By this time, their knowledge of equipment and stagecraft had expanded, with their shows getting wilder and more ambitious.
Chris used Marshall stuff. He started getting on really well with Marshall stuff. They did this series called VBA, which was like a valve bass amp, but it wasn't valve, it was transistor and valve mixed together. Except for he always had it wound round with a transistor, right? But then he also had a transistor amp next to it, which he used to put all his affected sounds through. So he had two splits. So basically, like you had a really sort of like solid bassy type sound, but then any distortion and stuff was layered on top of it, so it kept all the oomph. He used to use bass collection, basses, generally, and Padula as well was the other company he used. He had several different sources for bass, you know what I mean? He wasn't just a straight bass player. We had double bass, we had bass pedals. I got them into samplers and sampling because I saw it as being a cheaper way to, basically, not a cheaper way, but it was like kind of, we were hiring a piece of equipment from a company that the amount we were paying to hire it each day, like after a while they would have paid for a sampler, which would then enable them to expand that further, you know, and be able to have other sounds going on, you know, and it opened up, you know, they started having different tracks that they brought into the set because they'd used bass pedals on them in the recordings, you know, and they wanted to create these like sub-harmonics within the bass and like, you know, these sort of sub-synth sounds. And so, you know, you kind of like, I sort of got them into that side of things.
And Chris used to blow up bass amps all the time. He was very picky about which bass amp he wanted. If he didn't have the right amp, then there was trouble on tour. There was a famous occasion, I'm pretty sure it was Greece, where Chris blew up 2 amps in 5 minutes. I mean, rock and roll.
Bass guitars going through bass drums, not through the front skin either. Right. I think that was in Germany, in a festival in Germany, and they'd gone on one of their trashing kind of like sessions, and we had a specific bass that Chris used to use for the trashing, right? You know, and it actually had broken scratched into it.
Well, Muse are pretty famous for their kit abuse. They damage a lot of equipment. They sacrifice a lot of gear. It's a wonder they're still alive in some ways.
And I think Matt had a guitar that he had total respect for because he couldn't break it. Like, you know, it had so much gaffer tape on it. It had been repaired so many times that, you know, when he'd thrown it so high into the air so many times, and yet every time it had come back and it had lived, right? That he gained respect for it, you know, through its own batterings.
I can just imagine the road manager calling up for insurance. Hello, it's the road manager for Muse here. Can you quote me happy?
Dom used to use Tama, you know, Tama drums which was something I ended up setting up a deal with them just after we started working with them, and they sorted him out a Tama drum kit. I remember Dom went to tip the kick drum on its side as he was sort of throwing it off the riser, and Chris launched the bass at the same time, and the bass had a pointy headstock and it just punctured straight through the shell of the bass drum, right, you know, therefore rendering the bass drum completely useless. Another time a cymbal sliced through the floor tom, right, just took the whole side of the floor tom out, right, where the cymbal got thrown back at the drum kit and it just cut into it. Right. Matt used a right array of stuff over the period I did. First turn-up, I remember him having 4 different guitar amps. And he used to just turn them all on and off, and it was quite complex.
Matt loves his amazing sounds and amazing noises that he manages to produce. I mean, to that end, he carts around a wall of different guitar amps. And indeed, generally, any Muse concert resembles an electronics laboratory. I mean, there's knob twiddling, there are soldering irons, there are leads, patch bays, endless things going on to get the sound right.
One day he suddenly dropped all of them and went down to 1 amp and found that he got better sound out of it because he suddenly worked out how to sort of channel all the sounds into 1 amp and create the same sort of like monumental noise, but you know, kind of rather than it sounding like a muddy mess, it was much more defined and, you know, like, you know, and I mean both sides of the sound had their own individual characteristics, which were, you know, phenomenal for the periods they were in at the time. But, you know, at the same time, like he kind of like found, you know, by simplifying things, became easier. You know, I remember getting him into MIDI a little bit. You know, like kind of started to show him the things MIDI could do, like by just triggering other keyboards. Like, you know, I'd be like, right, you know, you can do this by pressing this button. You've now got this ready. Right, by selecting this sound, that bit of the equipment's ready as well. And you know, that used to, you know, those kind of things really amazed him. Saw him put a guitar through every speaker of a cab once, and then he wanted to take it into the studio to record it because he thought like it'd sound great. Until we told him it wouldn't make a noise anymore. Right, you know, if he'd left 1 speaker in it, it might have made a noise, but you know, the fact that he hadn't left any speakers in it meant it would not have made a noise anymore. It was just like.
In 2002, after mixed reviews about the second album, Muse were nominated for the Best British Band Award, voted by the readers of Kerrang Magazine.
What do you say? Yeah, well, cheers to the readers, you know, and this is kind of cool. I guess, you know, we've been told we can't say the word Kerrang for advertising readers. Kerrang, great magazine, Kerrang, great magazine. There you go. What's the big deal? Why can't we say that? I don't understand. What's all that about? It's a cool mag, though, isn't it? But I guess, you know, playing live is kind of the most important thing for being in any band. So, cheers. Thank you to the voters. See you later.
They won the award, beating Ash and Fidel.
I think it could be, because I think we try and put all of our personal feelings and all of our, you know, everything that we've experienced in our life into the music, do you know what I mean, and get all our systems on stage, and it kind of leaves us a little bit sort of chilled out as people when we're not on stage, but I think we're getting all out of our system right there, you know.
I first heard of them through some friends who had been going on about them, and I actually completely ignored them because they said that they sounded a lot like Radiohead.
For God's sake, do not mention the R word.
They took a lot of slating about being a second-rate Radiohead, this, that and the other, you know what I mean? Like, and they weren't, they never were, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know, okay, the guy's got a full set of voice. Jeff Buckley is someone else that, like, you know, he probably got compared to all the time because he could do that range thing, you know, and he could drop from a low, you know, he could go from a low note to a high note without even thinking about it.
So I was like, oh, another Radiohead band, you know, which was, you know, my loss because they were going to see them and they were always like, oh, you know, we're going to go see Muse tonight, and all I could think of was, it's the Radiohead band, I'm not bothering with that. And then it wasn't until sort of about a year after the first album came out and there was all the, you know, quite a big fuss, that I just thought, well, how bad can it be? And I took it home. I bought it at HMV, and I took it home and put in the CD player, first track. Before it even finished, I ran back down the road to, like, you know, just like get all the other stuff. It's one of those moments, you know, when you hear a band and it can just like change life like that. And that was one of those moments.
To be honest, to me, they never sounded anything like Radiohead. I think it's lazy rock journalists. It's definitely not the music, so I don't know what it is. Is it Matt's spiky hair or something?
In 2002, Muse took part in a second world tour promoting Origins of Symmetry and a DVD called Hullabaloo. The tour included the Reading Festival. And shortly after, they started thinking about creating a third album.
We're going to spend at least 2 months when we finish Reading doing that, just rehearsing and playing together, playing songs, and then we'll put it again in the studio sort of November time, something like that. I think it's quite uplifting. A lot of the new stuff more uplifting. It's not so angsty. I don't think. I think it's more like sort of something maybe it's a bit more personal as well. I think my personal life's changed a lot, and our personal lives have changed a lot. We've all grown up quite a lot, so I think for that reason the music's of a more personal, more uplifting nature. Because we had kids, I've fallen in love, and Dom's still doing lines of coke off models' tits, but apart from that, I think our personal lives have all kind of gone somewhere, do you know what I mean?
Did you have to say it?
With the release of the live DVD and CD Hullabaloo on its way, Matt and Dom both moved back to Islington with respective girlfriends and started to think about the third album, Absolution. Absolution was produced by Paul Reeves, John Cornfield and Rich Costey in Cello Studios, LA.
I met them in May 2004 when they went to LA to record what was going to be Absolution. That was the first time I actually ever met them. I was sent out to do a cover feature for Kerrang on sort of the making of Absolution, and you know, this was going to be Muse's next step into being, you know, an international sort of super band. So I met them there, saw them doing the album, and you know, did an interview over the course of 2 or 3 days, I think it was.
You often get quite a lot of interesting bands recording at Cello Studios. I mean, it's right on Sunset Boulevard, so it's next to all those famous places, you know, the Whiskey, Viper Rooms, the Roxy. But actually it's quite a low-key place, it's quite understated.
But they were doing sort of the final mixes with Rich Costey, who produced the album, and yeah, that was all. That was where it was all centred around. We sort of went down to the studio, and we were actually staying in the same hotel as them, and they'd been at this hotel in the Standard for an entire month. It's like walking into a fashion magazine spread, so it really is quite a crazy place. But they had been in apartments previously, and they'd gotten Dom apparently, the drummer, had wanted more nightlife, so they moved. So they weren't very far from the studio. It was only like 5-minute drive. Yeah. There wasn't much following to be done because they basically were in the studio. I mean, it was very much like visiting someone at work, you know, they were very much focused on the record because it was in its final mixing stages. So, you know, it was a pretty important time.
Cello Studios is actually a very modest place, and it doesn't have all the trappings of rock and rollism. It doesn't have the latest gadgets, etc. It's just a very modest, relaxed place in which to spend a lot of time. Important when you're recording.
I was sent out there to try and dish the dirt on this band who previously had garnered quite a reputation for being, you know, real hellraisers and bon viveurs. And we got there and, you know, Matt was on, like, you know, water. They weren't drinking. They were sort of like, they'd go down to the studio, they'd maybe go out. I said to them, so have you been going out much at all? And they were like, I think we've been out once or so.
And in LA, well, it's very easy to get into that late night scene in LA. Endless excellent bands playing. It's a bit of a mecca for rock and metal especially.
I mean, they do like to party, but I think they know when to and when not to. And I mean, he said there's no point in me getting drunk because it'll just wreck my voice completely. But when we went down to the studio, they let us hear 5 tracks that were actually finished, and they wouldn't let us hear anything else because it wasn't finished. So you know, they wanted us to hear the finished product. To play table tennis with him after the interview, which again was good. You know, he was like, you know, there was a table tennis table in the bar area of the Standard, and he was like, do you want a game? I'm like, I can't believe this. I'm playing table tennis. But that was fun, and he thrashed me. So.
In the run-up to releasing the third album, Muse released a downloadable single called Stockholm Syndrome. In addition, they played several club dates to gear up for a big arena tour, making Exeter the last stop.
A month later, they played a special set of promotional gigs, which were basically, they were sort of gearing up for this massive, massive arena tour, and they didn't want to do a lot of press because they were too stressed out with getting everything right. So they did this string of club dates where they would do all their press there, and so sort of reward the fans who, you know, they've long since gone away from such venues, but they basically played these little shows. I met them after that, and that was actually one of the best shows I saw them do in this time. It was in the Islington Academy, which is pretty small for them, and it was amazing to see. I was like that close up, and I could really see them playing, and it was like, it's real.
So here we have Muse. They've been on this great world tour. The sound stages of the world have been played. They've played in every country twice. And where do they end it? Their grand finale is to play the Exeter West Point bloody arena.
Because I went to see them play in Exeter a year ago, and they made the Exeter sort of tour date the last on their tour before, and they just sort of done a round the world tour. So it obviously meant a lot to them.
I mean, imagine what it must have been like for the local fans down there.
I mean, there's a lot of talk about how, you know, in the press, I don't know that Matt Bellamy's necessarily the most popular kind of person. People kind of perceive him as being this real arrogant sort of upstart. And I went with the idea of thinking that, oh, you know, he's probably going to... I mean, you know, they are a fantastic band, but, you know, sometimes you think people are not necessarily, you know, so nice. And I met them, and I was utterly stunned at a band that have really done quite a lot to certainly change the course of British music. How down to earth they were, and how sort of, you know, just normal, if you want a better expression. And particularly Matt, you know, who I expected to be some kind of like really kind of nerdy, sort of aloof kind of person. He was, you know, fascinating guy to talk to. You know, he was really interested in things, and it's actually rare when you interview bands that get past a certain point that they really have too much to say. They're more sort of, they become quite blasé about it. But he was, you know, he was kind of getting used to sort of, you know, back into rock metal work, because they'd had a few months off in between Origin of Symmetry and Absolution. So he was kind of getting back into the mode of it, and so he was still kind of, he actually says to me, he said, you've actually caught me at quite an honest period, because, you know, I'm quite nervous about everything. So to hear that from somebody who, you know, a few months previously I'd seen like throwing his guitar around his head like Hendrix, and hearing him just kind of like, you know, talk like that was quite, you know, it's quite exciting, really.
Absolution was finally released in 2003, selling 73,000 copies in just 1 week. The album proved to be different from the other two, fusing elements of classical and rock music.
Although you can see so many influences in the music, to me it all comes together in Absolution. It's an amazing record, and it just sticks around in your head. Looking back at Origin of Symmetry, there was a lot of, it seemed to be quite an experimentative album. There was a lot of new, it was so different from SHOWBIZ, but there were certain bits that seemed a bit unfocused, whereas you couldn't say that about Absolution.
This constant melding of various influences defined their style and separated them from the rest of the rock world.
Yeah, we've always kind of like mixed up bits of electronica, bits of like classical music, bits of rock music, and we've always tried to mix things together and see what happens, really, you know. So
I think all I can say about Muse is they had their own style. There was no, you know, they took so many different things from so many different angles.
Do you have any people who have influenced you, or that?
I mean, loads of stuff really, from Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, through to early electronic music, bands like Dinosaur Jr., Smashing Pumpkins, also a lot of jazz, piano music in general, yeah.
Muse's style of music is very individual now. It certainly has changed. Although you can see so many influences in their music and melded them together so well, it has just created something new. You find with most bands, like the music they play, the music they listen to are totally different things. For example, Chris and his obsession for status quo. He's really into status quo, and he's, you know, and I believe when he was, I'm sure he's admitted it to. I think he's even admitted on an interview that, like, you know, he went and saw them sound check, and I think he even played guitar for them in a sound check because. They didn't, you know, the guitarist wasn't there, you know, and he knew all the songs, I mean, you know, because he is that good a musician.
Most rock bands do tend to get a little bit stale. It's quite common. You've done the tours, you've done a few albums, you've done endless magazine interviews, lots of press, and you get a little bit tired, or you get a little bit lazy, and you just coast along for a bit. Muse, no way. These guys have only just begun.
Even though a lot of people find their music hard to listen to, if you listen to it carefully, you can actually get there are some catchy tunes in there.
The best thing about them is they're incredibly creative, they're incredibly sort of dramatic, they're very, very colourful. They do all these really complicated things, and yet at the end of the road there's all these songs that you can sing along to as well. And that's a far harder a thing to pull off.
It's like an incredible, rich 100-track recording, very complex, but you can still hum it.
In 2003, shortly after the European release of the album, Muse won the Q Innovation Award. Absolution also topped the charts in the UK. They then went on to win Best British Rock Indie Band at the Interactive Music Awards.
Congratulations, brilliant album, number one.
Cool.
Explain what this award is about.
It's kind of like, I think it's it's voted for by producers, so I don't know, it's like an innovation in music. I mean, what does that mean?
Music and sound. Well, I think,
creating new ideas or new soundscapes or whatever, I don't know.
Exactly, I think it's kind of about experimenting with ideas in music and trying things out, not being afraid to try things out, and I think, we've always tried to try new things for ourselves and push ourselves musically. So I think it's kind of about that.
This we had like loads of ideas really, and we don't really have a. You try and have a concept or like an idea, but it just turns to shit like halfway through, and you end up just ending up somewhere completely different. You know what I mean? It's good to kind of let improvisation play a part in it. I think we did.
He's not scared of using things that people would perceive as being out of date. It was like the whole finger tapping thing that had been done by Van Halen and stuff like that no one would touch with a barge pole.
He would use that. If that was right for the song, he would use it. Other bands wouldn't go there. They wouldn't dream of doing that.
Actually, I remember Matt buying a pedal in Japan, and he bought 2 of them, and they were hand built by somebody. I think it was Fuzz Factory or something like that. And he came upstairs really excited after, being downstairs in the shop. And he goes, "You wouldn't believe it. I've just found this pedal, and it makes everything sound broken. It just made this most horrendous noise that, and so he bought 2 of them. So everything sounded double broken. It was absolutely phenomenal. And he turned it into part of his sound, and he got something out of it that, no one else would even consider. I mean,
the influence of Muse on new and young bands is amazing. I get sent demos every day, and you can tell they've taken something from the Muse sound and they've incorporated it into their own. Very influential. That's, if you like, where the only comparison with Radiohead should be. The fact that they've done this, they've had this effect on new music.
What I like is every gig they play this, they have a set song list, but then each song changes every time. They don't just play the same structure. There's always little bits being changed and riffs being changed slightly. The ending's always different. What actually happens on stage is different.
It's just a case of development of ideas all the time. It was like, and suddenly you turn up. I remember when we were in Japan, and he suddenly turned up at the first show. It was like, right, we're doing everything differently now. Right, everything's going to change. Right, I've got this idea. So, right, what's the idea? Because what I want to do, I want to come on, and the first 6 songs are going to be acoustic. Right, and we're going to sit there on chairs, and we're going to play through these, and this is going to include Unintended and other such tracks and acoustic versions of a few others. Right, and then we're going to go off stage, and you're going to have 3 minutes and 20 seconds, which is the length of this track by Tom Waits called "What's He Building in There?" Right, and we're going to play this, and it's just this sort of clanking and all these noises and everything, right, and we're going to play through this track, which is 3 minutes 20 seconds long, and all the light you're going to have on stage is just strobe. So you're going to be running around on stage there, right, with strobes, getting all the black off of the amps and this, that, and the other, and and you're basically going to prepare the stage for us, and then we're going to run out with our guitars and we're going to turn it into a rock set. Like that, you know what I mean? And So that was what became the Japanese shows, and we did it, and like, you know, and it was absolute genius.
But no, they're always trying to bring something new into rock music instead of just playing your average, you know, Green Day or just punk rock or something like that. It's always like really, you know, either intricate bass line or amazing vocal range or whatever. It's just all different. It's all fresh.
Good drums make it.
Technical.
Yeah, technical drums
as well.
Yeah.
The way. When you've got hysteria, you've got some, instead of just having your simple bass line, your simple drums, then complex guitar line, you've got complex vocal line, complex guitar line being played simultaneously, as well as complex bass line and sort of just kick-ass drum beat.
Yeah.
I think each member of Muse has their own creative input to the overall sound, but importantly they know how to work together, they know how to work with each other's sound, with each other's instruments, to interlink with everything else.
So they're talented musicians, they show it all at the same time, but they all connect properly.
It was a spirit that when they got together, you know, and you don't see it amongst many bands. You see a lot of bands, and to be honest with you, you could take any one of those people in that band and replace them with someone else, and they would be able to, you know, they would be able to play exactly the same songs, and you wouldn't notice the difference. Whereas if you took a band like Muse and you took any one of those members out of that band, you would no longer have Muse. You know, all three of them are an integral part of that band.
In December 2003, the single Hysteria was released, which at the time charted at number 17. A very good end to the year for Muse. Over the past 10 years, Muse have built up a very strong following of fans and record labels, resulting in considerable worldwide recognition. They've influenced many young musicians and even have a tribute band called Bemused from Peterborough.
I came up with the idea just because it was kind of the reason I started playing guitar, really. I grew to like Muse over the years, and then downloaded live videos and stuff and saw them, and I was like, wow, I really want to do that. So I picked up my mate's guitar, I looked after it for a week when he went on holiday, and kind of got a real good feel for it instantly. And I just learnt a few Muse songs, and then, you know, I really loved playing it, and so I got myself my own guitar and my own amp for my birthday about a year and a bit ago. Just been playing every day since then, just learning more songs and stuff. And then I found these guys and said, do you want to do this tribute band thing? And they were like, yeah, sure.
Ever since I joined this Muse band and learning how to play Dom style, but right-handed because he's left-handed, it's changed my drumming ability.
Yeah, your drum style.
Yeah, it's totally changed because it's like added to the one I already had, and you know the stuff I've learnt over the years. I used to just sit at home and play my drums and play the same old licks over and over again. It just get kind of boring.
Yeah. I still do that.
You know, inevitably, yeah, they're going to have a phenomenal influence. I think Muse have come from what people saw as possibly a second-rate Radiohead band into possibly one of the most influential rock bands of, you know, their generation, like certainly from a UK point of view.
I'm sure a lot of up-and-coming bands would look at them as real inspiration. They come from a small seaside town in Devon, and they've just done so phenomenally well for themselves. I'm sure they're a big influence to a lot of local groups.
In England, a lot of kids are asking to learn how to play your songs in music lessons. How do you feel about that?
Slightly embarrassed, I think. Yeah, there you go.
A classic example of this to me is they do a fantastic version of a Billie Holiday track, Feeling Good, I believe. And, you know, I mean, that blew me away the first time I saw it, and it blew me away, like, and it's the way, you know, the passion in the breakdown and just the way they do it. And I've now been out and I've seen smaller bands covering that song in Muse's style because they almost think it's a Muse song. Right, you know, and yet, you know, it's a classic jazz song. So, obviously, you know, they've influenced people drastically.
February 2004 was the 10th anniversary for Muse. They spent it on tour in Japan and various other countries. Their hard-working approach and constant support of their albums have played a large part in their achievements and worldwide success.
Yeah, I'd say I was touring with them in sort of the SHOWBIZ period, but as I say, it was towards the end of it. They'd already been touring it a good year before I came into it. And I think, you know, in a way, one of the reasons why they worked as a band successfully was because they were willing to tour. and they toured that album for 2 years. They took the American ethic towards touring. A lot of English bands here don't take that ethic to touring. They'll tour for like 4 months, and then, as someone once said to me, they'll live in magazines, right? And they'll let the magazines do the work for them, you know. Whereas Muse were doing both. You know, they were doing all the magazine interviews, but they were still touring. They were building a reputation for themselves as a live band. Yeah, and that was what made them stood out amongst the crowd.
They just surprise you every time. The music gets bigger, better, and more distinctly Muse-like all the time. Although you can't define what that is, that is a sign of a great band.
Muse are just so adaptable, and they just work so hard at what they do, and they're so committed to their fans as well that it just means that there will be this reciprocal thing forevermore where they will give to their fans and their fans will give to them.
Unfortunately, 2004 proved to be a bit of a problem for the band due to accidents and personal tragedy.
I mean, they've had some terrible luck this year, you know, what with, you know, Dom's dad dying, Chris breaking his hand, Matt totaling his face on the guitar, you know. But I think you know, and if they can stay out of trouble like that, they will become one of the biggest bands. I hope they do. They deserve it, you know.
However, they still went on to win Best British Rock Act at the Brit Awards and the Best Live Act at the Q Awards. By the end of the year, they had also added an MTV award in Rome for Best Alternative Act, as well as a final gong for Best Act in the UK and Ireland. A perfect end to a not-so-perfect year.
It's cool, you know, it's cool for us because this is like, it's the biggest thing, isn't it? It's the biggest kind of awards, music celebration, I guess, in the UK, so it kind of feels good to be a part of it, you know, and it's nice to actually play here as well, but it's something, you know, your mum watches on TV.
There you go.
It's it's for the mums. She becomes very proud of you after this.
Muse.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Do you expect to win?
No, not at all. No. We didn't even know we were nominated until yesterday. We were touring around in America and stuff, and someone just said you're nominated, so here we are. Yeah.
Very.
So we got 2. Yeah, it's quite good.
So who gets?
One's kind of like sorry. We've got one proper one and one kind of.
We're going to fight over them.
Very good. Are there any questions for Muse? One right there.
Hi, this is from Newsround at the BBC. Not many British acts got nominated or have won. How does it feel to be one of the few that did?
It feels great because we spent a lot of time touring in Europe in the early days especially, and it's really nice to get an award. We've won a couple of awards before, but only in England, you know, so it's nice to get something outside of there, something that's voted for by European people. I think it means a lot to us.
From the heavy, dark tones of showbiz to the melodic, classically inspired Absolution, Muse have proved themselves to be an ever-changing, constantly evolving musical force, not only on record, but also in their live performances.
It's got kind of bigger and more powerful. I mean, there are a few quiet moments on Absolution. You know, it is pretty much like, I mean, it's an album about the end of the world, so you can't really go out quietly now, can you?
I think the music's changed for the better. It's got obviously more melodic, and I just think they're a good bunch of lads, really.
I think with each record they push things further because they're very, very ambitious and very creative, and I think each time, at the moment, they're one of those bands that they just surprise you each time. It just gets bigger and better and more, you know, ridiculous and yet more brilliant at the same time.
They've just become better musicians as a whole, I think. You know, more open-minded about stuff. And
I think that's what it is. I mean, every time you play a gig, you always get better. I mean, even just to sit down and play your instrument, you're always progressing all the time, and I mean, they've done it well and they got up there.
For people who were at the early shows, they'd have definitely seen a complete... You wouldn't recognise Muse as a band sort of 3 or 4 years ago. They used to be there on stage and it was just them and a simple backdrop that said Muse on it.
I know that when they used to play live, they were pretty static. I mean, they still did the music perfectly. You know, there was no denying their talent, but apparently they were quite sort of like wooden on stage.
Very little kind of communication between him and the audience, between the songs. He was a fairly reluctant frontman back then. He wasn't really as into it as he seems to be now, but now the live shows are something else.
I mean, you can kind of get too excited, really. I mean, when you're on stage, you can you just look out at the audience and you kind of get this need to want to do something that everyone's going to get into. But so for that reason, I don't look at the crowd too much because it makes me go a little bit too berserk, too quickly. So I try and I sort of just look at the crowd every now and again. That's enough to keep me hyped up for at least 2 or 3 songs.
I think it was in between them going on tour with the Red Hot Chili Peppers in the States, and they suddenly got a taste of having to perform on a big stage. And when they came back, they just brought it all with them. And ever since then, it's been like watching, like mini Hendrix on stage, it really has. I mean, that is something that I really, really do like about the band, is that they work on record. They're one thing on record, and they are fantastic on record. But live, they're another universe.
I saw them at Glastonbury this year, and they really were like nothing else there. And they're massive, sort of almost like operatic sets. It just really is an amazing performance, and I just think because they have got quite a unique style that they'll probably, they can just keep going and going.
The changes in their musical style have also been accompanied by changes in their image. Muse have progressed from makeup-wearing goths to their now established sleek and tailored look. They have now achieved a style and aura all of their own.
They have definitely changed image-wise as well. They've honed what they do. I mean, back in the late 90s when they were Rocket Baby dolls, I believe there was a period where they actually went through a goth phase with lipstick and covering songs by The Wedding Present and things like that.
The seeds of change were always there. They got the confidence through their live performances, and through that they got the confidence to pursue their own unique style. That, coupled with a very favourable audience reaction around the world, simply encouraged them more.
I remember some early press shots of Matt in sort of silvery lame shirts and rather questionable trousers, and things have become slightly more sobered up now. But no, I think they do have a good style now.
They've become better dressed, I think. They used to dress horribly.
I love that.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, when I see a video of them on Top of the Pops and Tom was on bass and Chris was on the drums, I mean...
And Matt's like miming the piano as well, doing that kind of thing. It's great.
It's great.
And someone comes on stage at the end breakdancing or something. It's quite funny.
Muse are currently preparing for their next album, which is bound to take us on a completely new and exciting musical journey, as we have come to expect from such musical pioneers. The 3 teenage boys from the sleepy town of Teignmouth have taken the rock world by storm. Their talent and popularity continues to grow and shows no sign of stopping. Muse have only just begun.
In 5 years' time, I think they'll be in a position where most of the bands you see around at the moment that are sort of flavour of the month are not going to be. I think Muse are going to still be going, still going to be putting out really great, challenging records. At least they better be.
I think Muse are just going to get bigger and better. They're one of these bands where you could see a long-term career for them.
It's really good that an English band have made such a mark on the musical map, because American rock became the biggest currency for years. So to have a band that really can sound like the universe exploding, and one you can sing along to, I think that's something to be really proud of.
In my career, I suppose, as a tech, I was ready to give it all up. I was really bored because I was doing the same show in and out, and when I was doing Muse, nothing was ever the same. Every day was different. I do like what they do. I think they have an original sound. I think they're very forward-thinking musicians, and yeah, I think they've definitely got a sound that's developing in their own way.
I think Muse are just going to get bigger and better. It's hard to see where they're going to go with their live show, because I think they are just at their peak with what they're doing right now. It's a product of somebody who knows exactly what they're doing and what they want to do with their music. So it's hard to see where they're going to follow from there. I mean, they're now described as a prog rock band, a progressive band, but short of a Rick Wakeman escapade of ice skates and King Arthur on ice. It's quite hard to see where they're going to go without getting too. They're going to have to tread a fine line without it getting too pompous.
Muse have really broken the mould. They've broken the archetype of what people around the world think a British metal band should sound like. Their contribution is immeasurable. They have inspired and opened up the music to so many new bands who will really reap the benefits of what Muse have sown, if you like. That is their real contribution to music.
The hardest thing about any band that's doing something that sounds new is that once it's been done, it's no longer new. So therefore, you've got to try and develop your sound and keep it sounding new. If there were a band out there that could do it, they can probably do it.